14th, Valentine's Day, 2021. Hello, especially to those of you who are watching on our YouTube channel. And welcome to the Caron Chapel service in this way in which we're able to open this moment up for a wider audience. I was just speaking to the patients that are here with me in the auditorium, and I have patients also watching at different locations around the campus. We continue to seek to do our very best to navigate in the circumstances of the pandemic, and are thrilled to be able to continue to offer the chapel in this form. I have a topic today, and I've thought about it all week, and I'm struggling with how to launch into it. I was thinking at the very last second about the juxtaposition of Valentine's Day and the piece of music that we just heard played by one of our patients, which was a kind of a memorial tribute piece. And Funeral for a Lover is the title of the song, and it calls to mind images of watching somebody to see if they're still breathing. And of course that takes me right into the landscape of opioid deaths and parents and families who may very well have been worried that they would come upon us in some moment. I remember very well a certain morning when I went to visit my mother, who was a chronically addicted alcoholic. A lot of other substances in play that were prescribed by physicians. This was many years ago. And I went to her home because she wasn't answering the phone, and usually I'd be like, I'm just leaving it alone, but I was so terrified about her not answering the phone that I went to the home. I had a key, I opened the door, and when I went in, she'd slid out of the couch and underneath a glass coffee table, so you could see her underneath it there, and it was a hard floor and there was a pool of blood. And I was sure that she was dead. She had suffered from what they call esophageal hemorrhaging, which is a late-stage alcoholism phenomenon in which the varices that line the esophagus burst because the filter that is the liver is clogged, and so it's like backed up pipes. And it turns out that was one of several episodes of esophageal hemorrhaging. My mother would survive, and then she lived. But in that moment, I was checking to see if she was breathing. And so we start on this note on Valentine's Day of the brutality of addiction in our relationships. And it's a tough note to sound, I recognize that. And I suspect that there are patients who are here on campus who are feeling some sort of way about wishing they could do the grand gesture of flowers or a fancy dinner or whatever. And I would submit to you at the very beginning of my discussion that one of the greatest things that you can do in a relationship if you suffer from an addictive disorder is to come to a place like this and get well. And this could be thought of as a Valentine's gift. It is a love offering to get clean and sober. It absolutely is. In terms of calendar, let me stop at one other place, which is that there's always roughly something like 30 to 35% of the Caron patient community identifies it within some branch of the Christian web. Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, varieties of flavors within each of those streams, but those traditions that organize themselves under those labels mark a certain event on Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, which is the entrance into Lent. And if I remember before I close today, I'll let patients know a little bit about that, but if you are a patient who wants to receive ashes on Wednesday, we're going to try and make that work in a COVID-safe way. And I would say, much like the communion that we practice here, you can mark Ash Wednesday without ashes, and you can mark communion without bread and juice. And in any case, the Sunday before, so in some of those Christian traditions, you have a lot of variety, and that's just as true of Hinduism and Buddhism. Today, I know our readers include a Native American, a Hindu, a Buddhist, and a Jewish reading, so I'm kind of excited for that variety. But I will say, even if you think you're literate enough to itemize various religious traditions, the mistake that many of us make as novices is that we think, oh, I know Buddhism, so I know what it is. But each of those should be described in plural. Buddhisms. There are various flavors of Buddhism. There are various expressions of Hinduism. There are various expressions of Judaism. Just like for those of us who grew up in the Catholic and Christian traditions, which was me, I learned, and I always kind of thought, oh, they're all the same, until I studied more deeply, and then I realized, no, they really are not all the same. And so celebrating difference is really part of it. But anyway, I was headed to a certain place, and I let myself get lost on a side teaching point. The place I was going was that today, in the high liturgical expressions of the Christian traditions, is what they call Transfiguration Sunday. And there's a particular gospel story that goes with today, in which Jesus, the peasant rabbi, is seen by his followers to go up on a mountain, and they notice him with Moses and Elijah in a way that makes no sense at all from a scientific and historical sense. So it's some sort of appearance, and this he is transfigured in their sight into someone who is in the heritage and traditions of these great teachers of old in that time. And they see him differently. And the reason I bring that to the table for an opening to the conversation I really want to have with you is that all of these pieces, the romantic heartbreak of people who have loved someone in addiction and feel like they're going to lose them, have to check if they're still breathing, and the ways in which the world's traditions mark moments of extraordinary glory and revelation, and the celebration of Ash Wednesday, which is this movement into this penitent period, all skirt around my central theme for today, which has a fun and challenging title. Well, the title is a phrase that I owe to a particular teacher. I'll tell you about him in a second. So the phrase is recovery of soul. And the teacher, who, Jessica, you may learn about, is a fellow by the name of Anton Boysen. And Anton Boysen was a founder of clinical chaplaincy in the early part of the 20th century. And he also was a preacher who had a psychiatric hospitalization. He lost his mind, as it were. And in his losing his soul and getting it back, he always felt that when he went back to hospital chaplaincy, that this was part of the essence of his work, was to help people regain something that they had lost. And it's interesting to me, I struggled in my own, I'm a personal long-term recovery. In my own recovery, I used to think, why do we call it recovery? Because it's not like I want to get the booze back or whatever. There's a hypothesis that there was a Jack before, but I don't want that Jack back, because that Jack, given the same person, the same circumstances, would end up in the same spot. So, and many people in AA and other recovery traditions have talked about the new man or the new person, and that's really very, very appropriate. And yet somehow this word recovery sticks tightly to the movement. And we talk about people who are in recovery and people in long-term recovery. And I would argue that I think Anton Boysen gives us a clue as to why that word has had such binding persistence, is because there's a part of us that gets lost in this. And that part of us, we hope we can regain. And it's not a fixed, static part. If you were drinking for 17 years, they used to say, oh, like if you started drinking at 13 and then you get sober at 20 or 30, you're sort of like still the 13-year-old emotionally. That emotional maturity sort of freezes itself when active addiction takes over. I definitely don't think that's true, is my immature response. But there's something about that. There's a part of the human development that gets stalled in these addictive disorders. And that's not the only, there's something so deep about what this topic circles around that I don't even know how to enter into it, except to tell you that we should not get lost in debates about the existence or non-existence of the soul. We should not worry about whether we mean the soul as the Greeks or the Hindus or the Christians or this particular scholar defined it or didn't define it. as soon as we start talking about what I'm talking about in terms of those academic debates, you have forgotten and missed Sean's tragic song, and the death of our loved ones, and the misery of my mom's blood on the floor of that beautiful living room, and the terror of her son thinking, oh my God, she's gone. Alcohol has taken her. And the thrill I had the day that I was, so let me use that as a story of that. My mom, and my relationship with my mom was extremely important, as I think any son with his mom, but I was the fourth of 5 children, and I was named after my dad, which was kind of odd, because my mom wanted Junior several times, but my dad finally said, this one's the last one, and you can name him after me. And then they had an oops after that, so I have a younger brother. But anyway, I became John Jr., and I attached to my mother with this sort of sense of like I'm somehow the junior in the family. And when I watched my mom like get sick, it was unhealthily, I didn't know how to detach from it. I've learned all this stuff today in my journey of recovery and since her death in 1994 about boundaries and about myself and about there was something so unhealthy about my relationship with my mother, especially after my dad died. I slid into this like surrogate spouse dynamic with my mom that was yuck. And I would drink with her at the bar, and like it was quite toxic, and it stalled me in my own development as a human being. And yet there was something that was pure and beautiful about it, because I loved her and she needed me, and I thought I was doing this heroic thing. So life is complicated, and I think it's really easy to go, oh, that's a dysfunctional relationship, or you just need to leave or whatever. But leaving my mom bleeding out under the coffee table isn't necessarily the right thing for me to do either. It might be. At a certain point, the child who leaves the mom bleeding out under the coffee table and can't even deal with it makes a choice for themselves for their own coping and survival. This stuff is tough. But anyway, I have an image in my mind I want to get to, and I need to tell you about the story of my relationship with my mom to get there, and then I want to bring it back to the topic at hand and let it apply to you. So my mom gets that sick. I'm that complexly stuck in the relationship. So I finally find my way into sobriety. We had attempted an intervention to get my mother to treatment. She went to treatment. She came back. She was drinking within 2 weeks after going to treatment. So many of us were like, well, she's just going to drink and die. But my younger brother, the oops, got clean and sober, and then his movement into sobriety and recovery made me think, well, maybe I don't need to die like this. So something happened for me, and I ended up in recovery. And my mother's, the episode of the coffee table was one of the pivotal things that made me. I was sober at that time, and I still wanted to rescue her. And so I tried to get my living siblings to organize an intervention for my mother. My oldest brother had been murdered, so there was one sibling that was not available. My oldest sister was like, I'm done with her. I organized the first intervention. She drank after it. I'm not coming. And my next older brother was still drinking. And he was like, let her drink. It's her business, it's her life, it's her whatever. So I was like, I don't have any real help here except my younger brother and I, who were both in recovery. James, my younger brother, was like, all right, I'll go. And I got her best friend, who was a very, very drunk attorney, and the doctor who was doing the esophageal hemorrhage surgeries from a medical perspective, and an addiction counselor that I knew, and that the 5 of us cornered my mother in this hospital room that was cornered like it was a wedge room on a strange architecture sort of situation. So I'm sure she felt like a cornered animal. And yet, the addiction counselor had said, there's a place, it wasn't Caron, but it was like Caron, very like Caron, high quality, very, very skilled, excellent treatment in a beautiful setting. And I was like, Mom, I really want you to go to this place. Look, here's the pamphlet. It looks pretty nice, in case any of you were sold on the lovely mountaintop location. And now you're like, you people baited and switched me. So, because there are 20 inches of snow on the ground and it's cold out here, it's miserable. Anyway, I'll never forget, there's two moments to tell about the story yet. One is that my mother looks at me from that cornered space after everybody has said you're an alcoholic and we think you should go to treatment, we have a place for you to go, we love you, and if you don't go, this is our boundary. And my boundary was, I'm not coming to the house, I'm not calling, I'm done, I'm out. And my younger brother was like, I will still call you on Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I'm out other than that. And the lawyer was like, I'm your friend and I'll always be your friend, but I think the kids are right and you should go. And the doctor was like, you're gonna die, woman, if you don't, your kids are trying to save your life. And so my mother looked right at me and she said, I'll go, but I will never speak to you again. And I said, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. So my mother goes to this treatment center. It was at a time pre-pandemic when eventually they called 2 weeks later and surprised us with, we want you all to participate in family care. So then those of us who were living all went for family treatment. My dad was quite long dead at that point. But those of us who were living, even the drinking brother was confronted and he left family education. Screw you, I'm not getting sober. Later he would get sober. And I want to just take you to one more stopping point in the history that a year later, my mother and I are in an AA meeting in the church where I'm a pastor. I had been an atheist, by the way, and I became a minister through my own journey of recovery. My mother and I are attending an AA meeting on Thursday at noon in the church where I'm a pastor, and my ex-wife, although I was married to her at that time, brings a cake. She was a baker, and it was this beautiful cake with a one-year medallion image on the cake. And the general tradition in recovery is not to have fancy baker-made cakes. It's just like grocery store, $4.99 cakes. But anyway, this cake was unbelievable, and it was so beautifully decorated. And the other tradition is that people who are in the meeting give the celebrant cards. So I give my mom a card, other people in the home group give my mom a card, it's all, everybody's like, oh, this is Irene's anniversary, and yay, she made it, and it's so cool. And then it's time for the celebrant if they want to say something, and my mom says, I have a card for you, and she gives me a card. I'm like, you're not supposed to give people cards. And she says, open it. I still have the card. It says, thank you for saving my life. My mom's soul had been taken from her by Tanqueray, and yours has been taken from you. You may not even realize it. If you don't realize it, hear what I'm saying. You have lost something that is essential to the capacity to be the best and most beautiful that your mom or your dad or whoever brought you into this world wanted you to be. They did not envision 28 Days at Wernerville as a great moment on your resume. And I know you probably didn't either. But there is, the only reason to come to a place like this is to come once and find your life again. And get to those moments like the cake and the card that I had with my mom. She later would die of lung cancer. Sadly, addiction still won the day. But that is one of the treasured moments of my life, was my mom acknowledging that my tough love had helped her find her way home. And this is soul retrieval. That's one of the things. People call this Magic Mountain. And they're like, what the hell does that mean? The place where my mom went was in Arizona. And I remember at the family education place, when we drove in, there was a big sign that said, expect a miracle. And it tricked me, so that after this immersion in this extraordinary process, we were leaving to go back to the airport, and on the way out, on the back of the expect a miracle sign, it said, you are the miracle. And many of you may not be thinking that. You may be thinking, my job has to fix itself, or my significant other has to get this right, or somebody has to, they can't make me do this, or blah, blah, blah. But then you're looking in the wrong place, respectfully, I would say. If you are spending your time worrying about that, you are not making the most of your caring experience. Dig deep. Look hard in the mirror. See if you can still find him or her inside of there. Let your treatment team know the private misery of your addictive spiral. It's our task to jump in the hole with you. That was Anton Boysen's other image, was for us to accompany people into the hell in which their souls had fallen, and then to walk with them alongside them to find their way back into the sunlight of the Spirit, one of the great AA expressions. So that's the hope and the theme for today on Transfiguration Sunday before we head into Lent. Woohoo! Yeah, ash and misery and death. But no, this is all about engaging our suffering for the triumph of Easter. And I could spin that in a Jewish way with Passover, and I could spin that in a Native American way with it's not the tradition that you choose, it's the hope that underlies all of this, is that our loved ones are taken from us by these horrible afflictions, and that we can put them in places like this to have them be helped and find their way home. So thank you, Marty, for recording.